Hi, guys. Sorry for the change in location, but welcome to week 6. It's Sunday morning for me right now, so I know you guys are busily submitting your Project One research proposals. I've already seen, I think there's 8 or 9 that have already been submitted. I think I've graded and provided feedback for about half of those so far. Taking a break from that to cut some videos for you. So we're going to kind of turn that corner now that we've kind of put our research proposal together. I'll do my best to get all those done back to you this week. Now we got to end of the conversation, right? We've kind of scratched the surface over the last several weeks, learning what we're talking about when we mean conversation. What does that mean? What does a scholarly conversation look like? So hopefully over the next couple of weeks, we can flesh that out, explore that a little bit more, maybe put some, I got a couple of visual things to kind of show you, maybe help us picture what it is, what it looks like, and even what it sounds like to a certain extent. So we lay the foundation in Project 1. Now Project 2, the annotated bibliography, this is going to provide us with the meat and potatoes, right? Everything that we need from a secondary research standpoint that we need for our final project, right? For the APA research paper. So for the next 2 weeks are kind of interconnected. So I've got a lot of stuff already posted for week 7. And you might find yourself bouncing back and forth. I'm actually even going to bounce around between the 2 pages, even in this video, because I kind of want to show you where we're heading as far as visually. And then I'll have a Project 2 annotated bibliography example for you. If not later this week, definitely for next week, so you can kind of see kind of what it looks like, at least written out. So this first part here, kind of talking about the annotated bibliography, one of the first things I really kind of want to do is, although we're thinking about 7 total sources, okay, so let's start there. We need 7 total sources minimum for this research paper. And we want to think about 2. We want to begin with 2. We want to find 2 that are really at the heart of our conversation. We call these launch texts, or I call them launch texts. Foundational texts might be another term. Core texts, whatever you want to call them. I'm calling them launch texts to help us get into the conversation. Then we're going to find 5 other resources that touch those, right? And we'll talk about what those what I mean by touch over the next week or so, a little bit today. So I've kind of reiterated the assignment here, right, for our week 6 page. So for the assignment here, the first goal is to secure two core sources or launch texts that significantly address your specific research question or questions. And from those sources, we can use those 2 sources. Oftentimes, I encourage students, once you find it's like, oh man, I just found 2 sources that are just like, oh, they're the best, right? I couldn't have found a better text, right? This one is so germane, right? It's so necessary. I mean, it's talking about what I'm talking about. So oftentimes then we try to find other sources, and that can be sometimes challenging. But one of the things I always encourage students to do is, especially if you find those 2 launch texts, look at who they're quoting, right? Especially in the sections of the paper that are really key to what you're talking about. Who are they source? Who are their sources? Who are they quoting? Who are they paraphrasing? Who are they referencing, we might say, okay? And look at those particular sections and then see if those the sources that they're quoting, paraphrasing, referencing, also work for you, right? And a lot of times we can find additional sources that way. Not always, but often we can. So that's I always encourage students to look at that. So we're looking for a minimum of 7 texts in total for the annotated bibliography. Really, we'll just focus mainly this week on finding your 2 core sources, right? Those launch texts that help you then find the other sources, because that helps you stay within the conversation, okay? And so the video this week, interestingly, I know we've talked about this, finding and entering conversations in your research. This video here, I found this about a year ago, and I found students find this extremely helpful, understanding visually and kind of wrapping your head around what we mean by this term. entering a conversation. Okay. And this library resource, I believe it's at USU, does a really, really good job of explaining that better than I think I could probably replicate it. So look at that. And then, of course, obviously read over the Project 2 annotated bibliography assignment description, which most of it I have posted on the page. All right. So I won't necessarily regurgitate everything because we're mainly just wanting to kind of stay right up here for now. Okay. Well, next week, we're going to talk about what summary and assessment and a relevance reflection, paragraph look like, what they mean. But this won't mean anything. Okay. You can summarize, assess, and reflect on 7 sources, but if those sources aren't together, okay, that's what we're going to focus on first, making sure that those sources are in that conversation. All right. So one of the things, once we get our 2 launch texts this week, minimum, right? And if you find others, you take those 2 launch texts and start looking at who they're referencing, go check out their articles, right, of who they're quoting or paraphrasing or referencing. Start to build, right, and put yours together, because what we want to kind of get like this, right? And I know this doesn't make a whole lot of sense maybe at this moment, okay? But we're going to kind of map our sources out next week. And what I call this mapping the conversation activity that helps you. If you perform this activity, it makes your annotated bibliography and then your APA research paper so much easier to write. Because if you understand your sources, okay, and you understand your sources enough to be able to map them like this, the rest is easier. Okay. I'm not saying it's easy, it's easier. Okay. So you can see source 1, source 2, right? So source 1 and source 2 and the bigger, the green and the blue, those are your launch texts. All right. And I'm going to go over this in more detail next week. So don't, what does converge, diverge mean? I'm going to discuss that next week. But I wanted to kind of give you a quick visual. So there's 7 sources on here, right? So just notice the 2 sources in the middle, those are your launch texts. And then springing from those, right, you've got your 5 additional sources minimum. You could have 6, you could have 7, you could have 8. Minimum is 5, okay? And then what we'll do is as we go throughout the week, right, and into next week, I'll talk more specifically about what convergence and divergence means. All right. Those are fancy terms, and I can't find ones that really necessarily work for what I'm thinking here. Is how are they connecting to your sources, right? So you've got a source that's saying something that you're also looking into, right? Helping you answer a research question, solve a problem, explore something a little bit more further, right? So the sources are, this source is talking like this. This source is also talking like this, very similarly. So they're converging, right? Or you may have sources talking about what I'm talking about, like this. There's another source over here. It's talking about what I'm talking about, but it's not talking about it. It's talking about it differently. It's talking about it like that, right? So it's diverging a little bit, right? And it could be in several different areas. It could be solutions. It could be let's say, what we would call opposing views, right? Could cause, we're talking about the same thing, but since this one here has a viewpoint going this way, this one has a viewpoint going that way. So the texts are diverging a little bit, right? Not necessarily mean they're not still in the same conversation, because you can have a conversation with opposing viewpoints. Because if you had nothing but a research paper written with everything that was just solely supporting what you wanted, and there was no opposing viewpoint, then it would be very biased, right? And we'll talk more about bias later, but just to kind of, so you understand a little bit what convergence and divergence means for the purpose of, I want to kind of, for where we're headed. Okay. So this is kind of where we're headed, right? Before we write, or as we are writing our annotated bibliography, it's really important to understand our sources. And we need to understand our sources in this way. And I'll talk more about this next week, but we need to understand who our author is. We need to understand their main points. What are their key words? What are the key things they're getting across? Especially we start with our 2 launch texts, and then we do the same thing with our additional text. Then we start to see, okay, how are they talking about it, right? So this is a conversation. So when you watch the video, all right, finding and entering conversations, when he gets to the parlor, he's going to tell you about the parlor problem, right? this is kind of, think about this as an academic parlor right here. Okay. Remember, academics, we don't necessarily meet in a room and have these kind of conversations. We do these through publishing articles. So this becomes the parlor. All right. All right. So I think that's, I spoke way longer than I intended to, but I wanted to make sure to give you a good enough start this week, kind of where we're headed, where we're going. All right. So I'll post that video right there. Look over the Project 2 annotated bibliography assignment description. And just right now, just think about the top, right? We're just thinking about gathering sources that are in conversation with one another. Watch that video, finding and entering conversations in your research. Understand what he's talking about when he's talking about the parlor. And we'll discuss more of that later on in the week. All right, guys, hope you had a great weekend. If you're watching this on Monday, okay. And I wish you a great week. And of course, I'll be back in touch. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me with any questions.